Joining us right now, brought to you by Shaw's and Star Market, perfecting the art of fresh, by findmassmoney.gov, by Time Out Market Boston, which is the best eating and drinking destination in the Fenway, all under one roof, timeoutmarket.com, and by John Sewer, the name to know when your drains don't flow. It is Mike Milbury. Mike, good morning.
Do you really have nude pictures of yourself on your phone?
Wiggy does apparently. I don't. I haven't checked recently.
Why Wiggy?
Well, because I like to send them to my lady. Listen, Mike, I got no issues.
Do you think that immediately gets her warm and fuzzy?
It actually does. You get the right angle, Mike. I mean, a lot of things look a lot of different. They look very different.
I just find that I find that head scratching.
It's all about the angles. That's because you don't know the proper angles.
I don't think I'd call it head scratching.
What about Wiggy do we not find head scratching?
I got no problem with being nude, Mike. I lived in a locker room majority of my life, so I got no issues walking around butt-ass naked.
You know what's also head scratching is why any college would invite a kicker to be their commencement speaker.
Yes,
I mean, it's like adding a goalie to the roster. You just can't trust them.
All right. Well, listen. Speaking of goaltenders, the Bruins have the right one. It seems like that has been that they chose to start these games, and tomorrow night, anything could happen. Where do you stand currently on the chance that this team gets it to a Game 7?
You know what? I was talking to my son about this last night, and he said, I asked him what people would want to talk about tomorrow, and he said that they want to know the pathway to a win. And really, the pathway to a win tomorrow night is pretty much the same path they were on in Game 5. Quick exits out of the zone. Which was much better. The passing was much crisper, and I think trying to take no penalties, especially not another too many men on the ice penalty, which is just ridiculous. I thought Florida's power play was really moving the puck well. Swayman had to make some great saves, so they got to stay out of the box. Somehow their power play has to generate a little more than they have because it's been anemic for the most part. And you got to have Swayman being a showstopper or a sway stopper or whatever you want to call it. I mean, he's got to be on top of his game. 2 days off, I think, was good for him. Schedule's been great for using one goaltender. You play every other day, and then all of a sudden you pop in a 2-day break, enough to get him back and refocused. And this guy seems to be as focused as anyone. So that's, for me, is the way to go and the way to approach this game. And I think I think that the way they played in the last game may have rejuvenated their ambitions, and that's a great thing. So I'm optimistic for a really good game. I can't promise anybody a win, but I think people are going to be jacked up in the locker room as well as in the stands.
Do you expect Brad Marchand to play?
I have no idea, but it hasn't sounded optimistic. And I'm reading these articles this morning about what an inspiration he is to be there. Well, that's all well and good, but I'd much rather have him at left wing.
Yeah.
Mike,
do you feel like there should have been some sort of disciplinary action when it comes to Sam Bennett?
It was a sneaky, dirty punch, and there should have been an immediate call on the ice. They missed it. You can understand why they miss it once in a while, but they shouldn't be missing it in Toronto where they have all night to take a look at it and then the following day to make a decision on it. Yeah, it's been the worst officiated playoff season I've seen in decades. Just been terrible all over the ice. They've missed stuff. They're second guessing themselves, and it leaves the players uncertain about what they can get away with, and it's not a good thing. And they're going to have to look at it as it's been a failure from the officiating standpoint.
I assume you feel like they blew the non-goalie interference call as well.
I do feel that they blew that against Coyle, and it was, it wasn't like it was such a raucous cross-check, but it was enough to get him into the goaltender and enough to give him enough time to just tap it into an open net. For me, that's egregious. I mean, the one that they got away with, a little bit got away with McAvoy's goal there was some contact there, but he was able to reset it. I never thought it should have been called back. But the way things are going, you really don't know what they're going to call. a situation where so much uncertainty around what's the right way to approach this.
Mike, what do you make out of Brad Marchand telling Maroon not to go after Bennett after that? Because I think a lot of fans were hoping that that's exactly what Maroon was going to do.
You know what? It's the only purpose it will serve will be to make everybody feel good. I mean, it's not going to. I mean, Sam Bennett's not going to be intimidated by a punch from Maroon, and everybody's covered with helmets and face masks, and it's not going to be. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And I think that's the approach that you have to take in the playoffs. I mean, if you want to get even, wait another 6 months to the first game of the regular season, and then have 3 guys jump them. But it's not going to do you any good now. And when your goal is to win a playoff series, you still have to play them tough, hit them when you get a chance. But if you cross the line and you give their power play, which can be very effective, an opportunity, you're going to regret it.
Mike, you talked about this a little bit, power play opportunities. I know we've talked about how there's not a lot of time in hockey because to really get on ice practices. How do you fix maybe some of those issues if you're a coach? Do you have enough time to maybe change up the power play scheme between games? I know you could change up the personnel, but is there enough time to maybe change up the scheme?
There should be enough time to change up the scheme. You got professional players who've been, doing this for a long time. Their entries are atrocious. I saw in the last game when they drop the puck back they push the defense back a little bit and then they drop it back. It's an old tactic, been around for 100 years, and then you get the defense to be sort of standing still. But the Bruins players cross in the middle, and then they wind up standing still. The wingers standing still at the far blue line. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you're sometimes you don't have the chance to have a clean entry, and you might have to chip it in. So you need the wingers to be moving. You can't have the wingers standing still at the blue line as the puck carrier is approaching it. It makes no sense to me. And then once you're in the zone, you have to rely a lot on skill. But there has to be constant movement of the puck or bodies around the ice. And when you get the opportunity, especially now in the playoffs when guys are all jacked up and pressure is intense and quick, you got to get it to the net. And you got to get somebody standing in front to look for tips or rebounds or screens. And right now their power play it's being mismanaged. And that's both a player and a coaching criticism, not just one or the other.
Mike Milbury is our guest. I have tickets to give away right now for tomorrow night, and then a question for you from a texter. But if you are caller number 9 on the contest line, which is 617-931-0937, you get 2 tickets for the Garden Game 6 tomorrow night. There are limited tickets still available at Ticketmaster.com/Bruins, but call now, and you will be there tomorrow night. Texter says 78, looks like a 785 text. When it comes to the too many men on the ice, who's to blame for that?
The players make the change. You get your name called up, and it's hard to say who. To answer the question with clarity is difficult, but the coaches, of which there are like 1,000 behind the bench now, right? I mean, just you have a responsibility as changing the defensemen or the forwards. If now it's become a problem, you should be. I can remember grabbing people and pulling them back, literally pulling them back from jumping on the ice, and it's a. The first point is you have to call out the replacements immediately. As soon as one shift has begun, you have to say, okay, next up is blah, 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 blah. And then so they know that the name's been called, their line has been called, their defense pairing has been called, and so they know they're ready to go. And then it's up to them to not only to follow the play, but to watch the guy that they're going to replace and make sure that he comes all the way to the bench. The other night it was Lindholm who was replacing, I think it was Wotherspoon, and Wotherspoon started to come to the bench, but then there was a turnover, and then Lindholm jumped too quick. And so you've got to be alert as a player on the bench once your name has been called, and the coaches have to be alert to call the replacements early and be ready to grab them or say no when the time's not right. So it's a combination of things, but if I were coaching and playing, I'd be embarrassed that this had happened so often.
Another Surprisingly, another text from Harrison Butker here. He says, not enough men on the ice.
Hey! Well done, Greg.
Mike, one of the I don't know if you noticed this, and one of the things my son and I were watching the game, and he asked me this question. He's like, and maybe you're noticing it, especially with the Bruins penalty kill. Does it seem it seems like the forwards and they pack everything in, and it allows, you talked about the puck possession by Florida. Does that factor into them having a lot of puck possession because their forwards don't go so high to the defensemen?
Absolutely, and I don't like it. If you watch Florida's penalty kill, they're rotational, which means you go to the puck carrier and you force them, and sometimes you'll be there late and it'll put you out of position and you'll look bad. But I much prefer it to a static pack it in power play or penalty kill. I much prefer that. If you give it good players enough time and space, and the other players around them know that they're going to get time and space, they're going to move to places where they can be available for a pass, or where a defenseman can slide across the blue line, change the angle of the approach of the checker, and just find enough light in the tunnel to get it to the net. It's dangerous. I was a proponent, and I am today, of aggressive penalty kill. You have to be able to sometimes retract that and go into a more static situation. That's easy enough to do. It's much easier to be a static box type penalty kill than it is a rotational aggressive penalty kill. So you can always move to that if things aren't going well. But for me, I think you're playing with fire when you sit back and just, let them, dance around the perimeter and then look for a cross seam pass or a light to the net. So that's my feeling on that.
Mike, I need you to settle an argument that we had on the show yesterday.
I don't know if Karen Reed's guilty or not.
All right, well, enjoy the game tomorrow. We'll talk to you next week. Yeah. Mike, Scheim, and I don't know, who agreed with you, Scheim? Was it just you or you and Wiggy? About the Panthers being a far better team.
Oh, no, I think that was just me.
Okay, so Scheim yesterday said that the Bruins just are not in the class of the Panthers. Do you agree with that?
I believe that the Panthers are a better team. I think the Bruins have better goaltending. I think the Panthers probably have a better core of defensemen and more depth at every position forward-wise. But you could ride a system and a goaltending situation into a good place. But if you just look at the center, Barkov and Bennett, the center position is much better. What has Pavel Zacha done in this playoff? He's not scored a goal. He hasn't scored a goal in 23 playoff games. And we were all asking for too much to see Zacha and Coyle become Krejci and Bergeron. That was never going to happen. We're seeing some of what we thought we would see in the preseason occurring now, or being a problem now. The great thing is that they're overcoming it with some solid efforts in goal in particular and some pretty gritty play. By the way, I think, I know McAvoy hasn't had the greatest postseason, but he's been crucified. And what I was glad to see him play so well and get the monkey off his back for a little bit, because the guy's multi-talented. I think he needs to be reined in a little bit. I think he sometimes expends too much energy running around and needs to corral it and find times to expend it properly. But this is going to be a good player for a long time. And I think, with the proper instruction and experience, he's going to get even better.
So you mentioned McAvoy, Mike. Do you think they're overworking him? Because he is far and away the Tom on ice leader for this team constantly. And it was just a couple games ago where he was 6 minutes more than the next defenseman on the ice. Do you think it's an overworking issue?
No, I don't.
Of course, Scheim thinks it's an overworking issue.
That was a question. I was curious.
No, I don't. I think a player like that who can skate as fluidly as McAvoy can, and he can skate. He can skate laterally, back and forth. I see him cheating from his side of the ice to his partner's side all the time. He's almost like he almost has too much energy, and he needs to corral that, to harness it, to see the ice a little bit more. He's still a young player, relatively speaking, and I think he needs to, think it out a little bit more often than when he needs to expend energy. But I don't think he's being overworked. I think you have to have one of those thoroughbred defensemen in your lineup if you're going to go anywhere. And he may not be the perfect number one, but he's your number one. And I sure would like the other guy that's riding shotgun as the number two defenseman, Lindholm, to play less like number two on most nights.
Yeah. Courtney, you get last question.
Did you get that, Greg?
Yeah, I got it.
Mike, I don't want to blame officiating by any means, but
I do.
Okay, well, it's been
them.
pretty bad, but I don't want to give that as an excuse for the position the Bees are in right now. But Don Sweeney saying he doesn't want to criticize the officiating because of a fine. Where do you fall on that?
I don't know what he was trying to accomplish there. He said that he wanted more transparency. I mean, they used to give an explanation of these calls the following day, and I don't know where that went, but he's right. And then I listened to ESPN. I forget which game it was, but it was Dave Jackson, the ex-official who works as a part-time commentator for ESPN, and they asked him about it. He called the war room in Toronto and got an explanation because he was an ex-official and they wanted it, and they gave it to him. They should be able to issue an explanation immediately from Toronto. They got enough people there. They got about 30, 40 people watching every game. There should be an easy way to explain why the call was made in a certain fashion. I mean, if you're going to take away from the responsibility of the on-ice officials, overrule them, then you owe it to everyone to give an explanation and give it immediately.
Mike, I hope the Bruins advance, and I hope with all my heart that we are talking to you about the next round next week on this show.
Have a good road show.
All right, we will next week. We'll be in your area. I know you committed to Beachcomber, but we'll be in Falmouth at the Flying Bridge 1 week from today. Should you want to stop by?
All right, I'll think about it. I'm excited already. Can you tell?
All right.